So my doctor broke my water, and right away, the next contraction was like a 9 out of 10 for me on the pain scale. I was like, "Ooh, okay, that's really painful." But the epidural, the anesthesiologist got there quickly. She was wonderful. She talked me through the whole thing. They put in like I think it's the numbing shot first. And that was interesting. Like, it's kind of like a twinge of pain. Like, I remember kind of like doing a shimmy and being like, "Ooh, I can feel that. That feels weird." But then she placed the actual epidural when I was having a contraction. And that was the best case scenario, because when my contraction was over, she was like, "Okay, I'm done."
You're listening to the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast, where you'll gain the tools, knowledge, and confidence you need to erase the unknowns, feel in control, and have an even better birth, no matter how you deliver. My name is Liesl Teen, mom of 2, practicing labor and delivery nurse, and your host. From over 8 years and counting of working at the bedside, I know that knowledge is the key to an even better birth. So tune in each week to learn about all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum from me, a labor and delivery nurse that's seen it all. And now let's get into this week's episode. This week on the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast, we are doing a birth story. I have Laura coming on today to share her positive birth experience. I'm not going to spoil too much for you guys, but I just got off with her, and she is just very organized in the way she tells her story. And she gives so many details about her experience with trying to conceive and, her pregnancy, and then her birth story and postpartum. And she gives some really, really amazing advice towards the end when she was talking about her postpartum experience. And I'm just really excited to share this episode with you guys. So without further ado, let's get into our birth story with Laura today. Hi, Laura. Welcome to the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm good. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on today. I was just telling her off mic or off camera, whatever you want to call it, that I just posted on my story that I was recording a birth story today. And these are my favorite episodes to record because I just love hearing from you guys. So yay, we're going to do a birth story. Usually what I tell people to do is kind of start from the beginning of your journey to getting, pregnant. If you had any losses that you want to share, you can share about those, but you kind of let your story unfold, and let's hear it.
Okay. Well, I met my husband in 2015. We met in college, and we dated for about 6 years. And then we got married in 2021. We were honest pretty early on about our goals in life and if we wanted to start a family. And we were both on the same page about wanting to do that. So we got married in the summer of 2021. And then I went off of birth control that fall. And I just wasn't really sure what to expect. You hear stories all the time about when it takes like a year or two to get pregnant, or sometimes women, require medicine or science to get pregnant, or they can't get pregnant. So I just really wasn't sure what to expect. But my mom and my sister both got pregnant really, really easily with their pregnancies. So just being genetically linked to them, I thought, well, there's a chance I could get pregnant the first cycle. Yeah. So we went ahead and got off of birth control just to kind of see what would happen. And it did take longer than I expected. So we went off in November, and I got pregnant the following October. So almost a full year.
Wow. Yeah.
And there were some months in that 11-month period where I definitely wasn't trying. And the first couple of months, we were kind of lackadaisical about it. I thought I was ovulating, so we would try, and then we weren't successful.
Yeah.
So I kind of got more scientific about it after the first couple of months when we weren't successful. I was like, well, maybe I'll do some research. I'm kind of a type A person anyway when it comes to things like this. So I downloaded the Flow app. I started charting my basal body temperature. I started doing all these things to just kind of figure out what was going on and learn more about my cycle. And I'm really glad that I did, because what I learned was that I was ovulating later than I thought. I was ovulating more on like day 17 or 18 instead of 14. And I knew my cycles were a little bit shorter. They were like 25, 26 days. So with that late ovulation and then having my cycle earlier, that second phase of my cycle was short. And I think that might have been impacting my ability to get pregnant.
Yeah.
So right around the time I was learning that, my cycle just kind of regulated itself. So it took about 9 cycles off of birth control to have like a quote unquote normal cycle that was like around 28 days, ovulating somewhere in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell my friends when they're like, oh, we're thinking about starting a family. What was your experience? I often just say, you just never know. Like, I was on birth control for 15 years and it took 9 cycles to regulate. I know friends that were on birth control for even longer and it took them 1 cycle. So you just never know. Just if you're starting a family, just be prepared. It could happen that month, or it could be a year or 2, or you might need some help. So
absolutely. Yeah, that's very good advice because it's so true. And you really don't know until you jump in and do it.
Yeah. And I was really happy, like I said, that I started kind of doing some research on my own and trying to figure out what was going on. I bought those ovulation strips off of Amazon, and that was really helpful as well. Mm-hmm. So my cycle regulated around 9 cycles and we got pregnant on the 11th cycle. So about 3 months after things were kind of regulating themselves, we were successful.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, tell me, after 11 cycles of were you a tester? Like you're testing early, or I was the same way. It took me a few cycles to get pregnant with Rylan, but I was like, I know it's one or the other. People are like, nope, I'm going to wait for my period and not test. Or some people are like testing really early. So I want to know what it was like to get a freaking positive pregnancy test after 11 cycles.
Yeah. I mean, at first, I feel like we were kind of in that like, oh, we're trying, not trying. We're just like, we're seeing what happens. And so I really wasn't testing. Then when I started buying the ovulation strips, those actually come with some pregnancy strips as well, test strips. So I was able to test at home. And at first I was testing a lot, like on day 26, 27, I was like, okay, I'm testing. Like, I don't care. Let's see what's going on. Yeah. And it was always really disappointing when it was negative. And then I kind of got in my head like, oh, but it's early. So it could be, false, and I'll try again. And then, my period would come and I would just feel so disappointed because it didn't happen again. So actually the cycle that I got pregnant, I was having some early symptoms, some kind of early pregnancy symptoms. But the funny thing about early pregnancy symptoms is that they're very similar to PMS.
Sure are. That's the way it works, right?
Yeah. So I had a headache one day. I was really, really fatigued the week leading up to what I thought was my period. The one thing that really kind of gave it away was I was still charting my basal body temperature. So on day 26, my temperature went up a little bit and I was like, that's interesting. And then on day 27, it went up again. And I was like, well, that's never happened before. So I was trying not to test because I hated being so disappointed. And I was testing in the morning and it was before work. And then I just felt like my whole day was just like weird at work because I was disappointed. Yeah. But when my temperature rose again on day 27, I was like, that's never happened before. I'm going to take a test. Mm-hmm. So I woke up that morning, I took a test. I turned it over so I couldn't see the results, and I ran downstairs and kind of was getting ready for my day. And I always take my dog on a walk in the mornings. So I was getting her leash on and I flipped the test over before I walked out the door and I saw a pink line. And I was like, well, I've never seen that before. So that definitely means I'm pregnant. So I was so excited. I was like immediately shaking. I like sprinted up the stairs to tell Brett, my husband, but he was in the shower getting ready for work. Mm-hmm. And I kind of had this like pause because I always wanted to do something like a surprise for him, like buy a little onesie or something and kind of let him figure it out. Yeah. But then with it taking 11 months to get pregnant, we had a lot of conversations like every week, like I'm ovulating and now we're waiting. And so I figured it really wouldn't be a surprise when I was pregnant. Yeah. But I ran up the stairs and I saw he was in the shower and I was like, I'm going to do something cute, like I always wanted to do. So I got on Amazon and I ordered a bandana for our dog to wear that said Big Sister. But it wouldn't come until the following day. So I knew I had to keep it secret for like at least 24 hours. So that was hard going to work and like, knowing I was thinking, I'm probably pregnant. This is probably it. And not telling him. And then, so that was a Friday, and Saturday we actually had lined up to go on a hike in Charlottesville. So I had to be quiet, like the whole ride there, the whole hike. And I wasn't feeling that great on the hike. And so it was hard. He was like, "Are you okay? Like, you're really out of breath." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine." So yeah. But then when we got home, the package was there and I put the bandana on our dog, and typical man, he like didn't really notice. He noticed that she was wearing a bandana, but he didn't read it. I actually had to like prompt him and say like, "Hey, what does it say? Like, read it." Aww. And he got it right away. He was like, "Oh my gosh, you're pregnant." He was so excited. Yeah.
I love that. I love hearing those moments too, because it's such an intimate moment and such a unique moment to like find out you're pregnant and then like tell your partner or tell your parents, or wait, I want to hear some family, how you told your family too.
Yeah. So we were pretty private. We didn't tell anybody it really was like the first through the 9th week. We were kind of nervous Nellies about the whole thing. I think just taking a little longer than we expected to get pregnant, it just started to make us nervous about like, well, are we going to have issues? Like, is this something that we're going to have to worry about? So we were pretty private. We pretty much kept it to ourselves. So the first trimester, it was pretty normal for me. I had like some fatigue. I had a lot of acne. That was fun. And that lasted through the 30th week. Some mild cramping on and off, some cravings, but honestly, it was pretty smooth sailing. Good. And then at the 9th week, we were home with my family for Thanksgiving. We had just had our 8-week appointment where we saw the heartbeat. Everything was measuring on track, and we started to feel a little bit more confident. Brett even asked the nurse practitioner we met with something along the lines of like, "Can I stop being so nervous?" Yeah. And, she was like, "Well, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you exactly what's going to happen. But yeah, making it to 8 weeks is a really good thing. You should be excited." Yes. So we were feeling good, and we were home in North Carolina visiting my family for Thanksgiving. And I actually started spotting a little bit.
Oh no.
Yeah. Oh. And of course it was over the holidays, 4 hours away from home.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, at first I was kind of like, "Oh, this isn't so bad." Like people spot, but we called the doctor and they said basically monitor from home.
Watch it. Yeah.
Yeah. If you start bleeding profusely or you're having pain, you need to go to a hospital. But if you're just spotting, just kind of monitor your symptoms from home. And they just kept saying, it could be the start of a miscarriage or not. It could be normal. So just take it easy. Yeah. But we were totally freaked out, and we ended up telling my parents because I think we just wanted some family to talk to at that point. Yeah. My dad is a doctor. He's a GI doctor. So he does nothing with OBGYN, but it just kind of felt good to tell somebody in the medical world that we're close to, kind of like, "Hey, this is what we're dealing with." Mm-hmm. And my mom, unfortunately, had experienced a lot of miscarriages. So it felt good to tell her too, just somebody who would understand if that is what was going on. So it was kind of weird telling them because we were like, "Hey, we're pregnant, but..."
but also there's this.
But we might not be pregnant. Yeah. So that was kind of like bittersweet and kind of just a weird time in the pregnancy. Yeah. It was definitely a scare. So that lasted about 3 days of spotting on and off. And I did end up going to the hospital on the 3rd day because I was having some more cramping. And I called the office and they said, "Well, you might as well go in." And we went in and everything was great. There was still a heartbeat. The baby had grown since the 8-week appointment, was right on track. So they kind of said the same thing that my doctor said, "Just go home, take it easy, keep monitoring your symptoms." And after about 6 days, it stopped. Great. And that was that. So it was a really weird scare, but it really was just spotting, just normal spotting, I guess.
Yeah. And that is a very common first trimester symptom. Whenever people ask about bleeding, I always say, call your doctor. Anytime you bleed in pregnancy, it is abnormal, right? It's common, but it's abnormal. So I always say, call your doctor, or midwife or whoever, and let them know what's going on just so they know. And then, kind of go from there. But yeah, it's very, very common in that first trimester. And you're right. It can mean nothing, absolutely nothing, or it can be, the first sign of a miscarriage. So I'm glad everything was okay. Yeah. Let's proceed a little bit into your pregnancy. Yeah. 2nd trimester, 3rd trimester, anything super eventful happen?
Honestly, I was really lucky. I had a really easy pregnancy. I mean, it wasn't without some pains and aches. But when I was kind of reflecting on the whole thing for this podcast, I was like, I really had it really lucky and I should be really grateful.
Yeah.
Second trimester was definitely the golden trimester. We found out we were having a boy, which we were so excited about. My husband, of course we say like, oh, we just want a healthy baby. And we really would have been so excited to have a girl, but he had always kind of envisioned himself having a boy. And so just getting that news was so exciting for us.
Yeah.
I started to get a little bump. So it was fun. We started telling our friends and family. We told Brett's family on Christmas Eve. And yeah, it was a really fun trimester, honestly.
Yeah.
And then the third trimester was great too. I felt pretty good overall. I had just more aches and pains. It's just hard being heavier, going up and down stairs, getting in and out of the car, putting your shoes on, just kind of the typical things that you would expect. I had some like weird symptoms. Like I had carpal tunnel in my wrists and hands. Like it was really painful to squeeze my hands. It was just a weird symptom, but it made like writing difficult and it made like opening jars difficult. So, just little minor inconveniences more than anything else. But yeah, I feel really lucky. I didn't ever have nausea. Really, my worst symptom was just acne. It just would not go away. But in my third trimester, it finally started to clear up. So
interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So wait, you didn't have any nausea even in the first trimester?
No.
Oh my goodness. That's wild. You're like one of the, I think it's 85% or 90% or something crazy high percentage of people will have nausea, at least a little bit of nausea. So you're a lucky duck there.
I felt so lucky because I think everybody would say they hate feeling sick, but And I work with toddlers and I was like, what am I going to do if I'm like running
if you have to change diapers?
All these, but no, I did have, I would say like there were 3 weeks, right? Early pregnancy, like 6 to 9 weeks where I just felt off. Like I wasn't that hungry. Like I would pack a lunch and I'd open it and just be like, I don't really want this. It wasn't that I was like on the verge of throwing up. It was just like nothing sounded good except for like plain carbs, like toast, a biscuit, a bagel, rice, noodles. Like that's kind of all I really wanted to eat. But that went away, like I said, within like 3 weeks. And then felt really good stomach wise for the whole pregnancy. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, very lucky.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's get into the birth story. And so tell me kind of the days leading up to when it all happened, if you were induced, if, you went into labor, your water broke, what kind of happened?
So I was due July 1st. So I felt like really calm. My third trimester, I was doing lots of research, listening to all of your podcasts, and I bought your birth course, and I just felt like prepared and calm. And I was like, he'll come when he comes. And then like the last week of June hit, and I was like, I'm done. This is enough. It is hot and I am huge. So the last week of June, I was doing a lot of the like red raspberry leaf tea, eating some dates. I have followed this lady on Instagram. She's a local food blogger here in Richmond. Her Instagram handle is called Eating Bird Food. And she has, I know, she has amazing date recipes. They're really good.
Good to know.
Yeah. So if you're ever looking for like, they're like Snickers and like smoothies and things like that, they were really good. So that was tolerable.
I'm going to write that down and check her out because I've always said I tried the dates with both of my pregnancies towards the end, but for some reason, like the texture of them, I can't do it. Want to learn more about epidural use during birth? Whether you're team epidural all the way or maybe you aren't so sure yet, I encourage everyone to learn about this medical pain intervention, and that's why I created the free Epidural Birth Prep Pack. Inside, you'll find printable resources to help you learn more about epidurals and help you prepare for your birth. It includes the Epidural Basics Guide, which is a quick primer on epidurals so that you know a little bit about what to expect when the time comes, our super popular hospital bag checklist so that you know your hospital bag is stocked with everything you need for that big day. You'll get traditional and visual birth plan templates to help you think through all the questions related to your birth and gain the sense of control that you deserve. And finally, you'll get a third trimester to-do list to feel completely at ease heading into labor, knowing you've checked every box. To start learning more for your even better birth, simply head on over to mommylabornurse.com/epidural pack. That's mommylabornurse.com/epidural pack to access your free epidural prep pack today. So that's really good to hear that she has a lot of like date-based recipes to try. Yeah. I'm definitely going to check that out.
I don't think I would ever be able to bring myself to eat one out of the jar. Yeah, I needed them like blended with almond butter and, all kinds of other things to get them down. Yeah. I did a lot of curb walking. I did a lot of like exercising up and down the stairs and just walking around the neighborhood, bouncing on the ball. So I had my 39-week appointment on a Friday and I was due that Monday or maybe Sunday. Mm-hmm. So at that appointment, I had a membrane sweep. And the doctor said, if this is going to work, it will probably work within 48 hours. So sometime this weekend, if you go into labor, maybe it worked. Yeah. So we were kind of on baby watch that weekend and my due date was that Saturday and I lost my mucus plug that morning and I was like, things are happening. This is great. But I felt pretty normal that day, honestly, like no other symptoms. Of course, my husband was like a ball of nerves staring at me like, are you going to pop? But it was a pretty normal day. We took some walks. We just kind of chilled at home. We got some Shake Shack.
Nice.
Yeah. And then that night we went to bed. So my due date came and went and I woke up at like 3 a.m. with a contraction and I had a ton of Braxton Hicks my second trimester, but this definitely felt different. It was just more global. Like I felt like my whole stomach was getting tight. Mm-hmm. But it really wasn't painful. Like I woke up from it because it was like a sensation, but it really wasn't like I jolted awake like, oh my gosh. And then about 30 minutes later, I had another one and I was like, ooh, this is it. Mm-hmm. And then I fell asleep and woke up the next morning and I was like, well, I guess that was just practice. So just 2 contractions.
Okay, slow and steady wins the race, right?
Just practicing for the big day. So then it was July 2nd. And again, it was a really normal day. It was incredibly hot here in Richmond. So I wanted to go on a walk, but it was too hot to be outside. So we actually walked through Costco. And that was pretty fun. One of the sample ladies asked me when I was due and it was fun to be like, yesterday. She was like, oh my gosh. But again, no signs of labor like the whole day, just a totally normal day. And then that night we were getting into bed and it was about 10 o'clock and we had just turned off the lights and we're like cozying down and I felt a contraction like right at 10 o'clock. And Brett even looked at me and was like, are you having a contraction? And I was like, yeah, but like I had 2 last night and it's probably nothing. I just didn't want to like alert him. He had work in the morning. I was like, it's probably nothing. Let's just go to sleep.
Yeah.
So we went to bed and then at 10:30, I had another one. And then at 10:45, I had another one. So I got out my app and I started tracking things because I was like, okay, 3, that's more than I had last night.
Yeah.
And so they were about 15 minutes apart and then they dropped to 8 minutes apart and then 6 minutes apart all before midnight. So pretty quickly, I was like, I think I'm in labor.
Yeah, this is something.
Yeah, like this is not slowing down.
Yeah.
They stayed at 6 minutes apart until about 2 a.m. And then they dropped to like between 5 and 4 minutes apart. Okay. So I was like, okay, time to wake up Brett and let him know what's going on. So I woke him up and told him that we were in labor. And honestly, at that point, it really wasn't that painful. Yeah. Just that tightening kind of global feeling. And, it follows a pattern. So I started to feel the contraction come on and I was like, okay, I'm having a contraction. And then about 30 seconds and I was like, okay, yeah, that's really tight. That's a little painful. And then within a couple of seconds, it was like, okay, it's going away. Yeah. So it really was not awful, which is mostly why I didn't wake my husband up earlier. I was like, we're about to never sleep again in our entire lives. So I might as well let him sleep for 4 hours. So woke him up.
So nice of you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's so thoughtful. So I woke him up around 2. I was like, I'm in labor. We kind of like packed up the car, spent some time with my dog and called the doctor's office. And they said, you can head in whenever you want. Their policy was if the contractions are between 3 and 5 minutes and lasting more than a minute, then you can head to the hospital.
Yeah.
And the contractions started to get more regular around like the 4-minute mark. And I was like, this is happening kind of fast. So maybe we should just go. So we left for the hospital around 4 a.m. and there was one contraction in the car where I was like, I am really thankful that we are headed to the hospital. I am an epidural girly all the way. Like as soon as I saw the pink line back in October, I was like, I'm pregnant. I'm getting an epidural. Like,
I love it.
I know myself, like if I stub my toe, I'm crying. So I was like, I don't need to be a hero. I am on the way to the hospital to get an epidural.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah. So I was thankful that we were on the way around 4 a.m. when I was starting to be in a little bit more pain.
Yeah.
So we got to triage and they checked me and I was only 3 centimeters dilated, 70% of face.
Oh, yeah. But like you're like, it's something. It's like, come on.
Yeah. So they told us we could go home or we could stay. And we were both like, we want to stay because we had already, packed up everything, fed the dog. Like it just made more sense. So we were admitted and I labored in the room until about 10 a.m. just on my own. Well, with Brett, but breathing, swaying, bouncing on the yoga ball.
Yeah.
I was hooked up to a monitor, I think the whole time. So we were watching the contractions and, well, I guess I wasn't because I was moving around the room. But we had our app open where we were tracking them because I know that when one would start to time it and he was kind of helping me like, okay, it's been 30 seconds. It's going to get intense. And then after that 30 seconds, he's like, okay, you made it to a minute. It's coming down. So that was really helpful and kind of gearing up for the contractions. He'd say like, hey, it's been about 4 minutes just to let you know. So that was really helpful to have my partner kind of just helping me through contractions that way. I just really hated being in the bed at that time. And I was kind of like, how am I going to like getting an epidural? Because I know I'm going to be stuck in this bed. Yeah. And at that point it was painful, but I was still able to like breathe and talk through contractions. So I was mostly moving around the room at that point. Around 10, the doctor who was rounding came in and she checked me and I was 4 centimeters, 90% of face. So a little bit of progress at that point. I was in labor for 12 hours. So she said, we can go ahead and break your water if you want. And I said, yes, let's do that. And also I've heard from the Mommy Labor Nurse podcast that can make things more intense. So let's get the anesthesiologist like on deck.
Good idea. Yeah. That's what I always do with my patients, unless they're having, issues with their labor pattern and they need, their water broken. But if they're like, I want an epidural, let's get your epidural before we break your water because it might be a little more painful.
And I was like, I know that I need to have fluids. I know that you guys need to test my platelets. Like, has all of that been done? Are we good? Yeah. And they were like, yeah, we're good. Like, if you want it, we'll put in the order. And I was like, let's do it. Yeah. So my doctor broke my water. And right away, the next contraction was like a 9 out of 10 for me on the pain scale. I was like, okay, that's really painful. And honestly, it took 30 minutes for the epidural to be placed. And those 30 minutes are kind of a blur. Like, I know I was up. I had to go to the bathroom at some point. I was leaking water all over the room. It was kind of a mess. I know I was like shaking and I was feeling a lot of pain in like my back, kind of like if you've ever had really sharp, like gas pain in your, almost like your colon, like it just was really, really sharp in my lower back. And so that was uncomfortable, but the epidural, the anesthesiologist got there quickly. She was wonderful. She talked me through the whole thing. They put in like I think it's the numbing shot first. And that was interesting. Like, it's kind of like a twinge of pain. Like, I remember kind of like doing a shimmy and being like, oh, I can feel that. That feels weird. But then she placed the actual epidural when I was having a contraction. And that was the best case scenario because when my contraction was over, she was like, okay, I'm done. And I didn't even feel, I mean, I know I was numb, which probably also helped, but it was not a big deal at all. So if you're nervous about it, getting an epidural, I mean, I think it helps to get one when you're already a 9 out of 10 in pain from contractions. Cause it's just, I mean, it's like, if you got hit by a car and somebody gives you like steps on your toe, it's just not a big deal because there's other bigger things going on.
Exactly. So. Good analogy.
Thanks. So after that was around 10:30 and I felt really, really good until about 4:00. So I chilled. I took a nap. The nurse came in and put a peanut ball between my legs and kind of helped me switch positions every now and then. My husband got to chill a little bit. I don't think he slept because he was so like amped up from being there, but he got to like go outside and touch grass a couple times and like breathe through this whole process. So that was really nice for both of us. And one interesting thing was kind of as time went on, the right side of my body was much more affected by the epidural. So my right foot fell completely asleep. Like I couldn't move it at all. So I was really dependent on the nurses to kind of like help me change positions, which I think I would have been anyway, but I really couldn't help them at all. I mean, we laugh about it now, but there were times where I would look over and my right leg was literally hanging out of the bed. And I'm like, Brett, my leg. He's like, oh my gosh, trying to help me get it back in. And I couldn't, I mean, it was gone. I could not feel my leg.
Yeah.
So that was interesting, but overall the epidural was very good. And around 4:00, I started feeling this interesting kind of like dull, achy pain on my right rib cage. My baby was LOA. So he was on the left side of my body, my stomach, head down, but his back was very much so against like my left side of my stomach. And then his bottom was kind of curled up under my left ribs. And then his legs were curled up under my right ribs. Right where his legs were, I was feeling this like dull, achy feeling, kind of like if you have ever fallen asleep in the car and you wake up with like a crick in your neck and you're just like, oh, what is this? It kind of felt like that. But what I thought would make it feel better is like getting on all fours and doing like some child pose or cats and cows and kind of working it out. But of course, having the epidural, I was really unable to kind of like stretch like I wanted to. So we called the nurse in and she helped me. She kind of took my lead and was like, you know, what do you think would help? What position do you want to be in? And she helped me move into a couple different positions, kind of like draping over a yoga ball and just some creative things, honestly, to help me stretch out. And every time I moved, it was like, oh yeah, this is great. Thank you so much. And then like 10 minutes later, we would call her and be like, I'm so sorry. I'm still in a lot of pain. Can you help me? And that went on for almost 3 hours where it was just like, I couldn't get comfortable. And the pain went from kind of this like dull feeling to like really painful, like almost like a burning sensation. And I started like feeling like I couldn't get a deep breath in. I was getting the epidural shakes and I started just getting really nervous about pushing because I was in the most pain laying on my back. And I was like, I'm going to need good breath support and probably, I don't know if you can hear it. My little guy is crying.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah. No, I love when we can hear it, but if you need to go and like tend to him too, it's okay.
My husband is luckily home today. So he is on baby duty.
There you go.
So they should be just fine.
Okay.
It sounds like he's waking up from a nap and they're going to go downstairs and,
I heard him a little bit.
Yeah.
I heard him.
He's probably hungry. But yeah, so burning sensation in my ribs. So I started getting nervous about pushing. And around that time, I could tell like the nurses were kind of also maybe a little confused. They were like, I don't know, like we keep changing positions. Nothing's really helping. So they called the anesthesiologist and he came back and he was kind of like palpating my ribs and asking me some questions. And he actually said, well, it's possible that the baby kicked you and may have like damaged or broken even one of your ribs. Yikes. And I was like, what? That's crazy. Yeah. So he asked my permission to, I'm not sure if he like redosed the epidural or like turned it up because I don't think that like I didn't have to have another epidural placed, but they did something with the medicine where it made it less painful.
Did they take the tape off of your back at all?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Yeah, they probably just gave you more and were you sitting probably on your other side? Yeah. So hopefully it goes, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So there were some position changes and that really helped within about an hour. So that was about 7:00. And by 8:00, I was feeling a lot better.
Good.
Like very numb. So I was like, I can't feel my ribs at all. And around that time I got checked again and I was 7 centimeters and 100% effaced. So still making progress.
Yeah.
And from 7 to 8, it was really chill. I just I think I might've napped again. The nurse checked on me a couple of times and I just was feeling really good at that point. And then around 8:00, I became extremely nauseous. The only thing I could get out was like puke bag. And then I threw up and
there it all is from 9 months during labor.
Yep. That's the one time I threw up.
Oh.
And I started just getting, I think, uncomfortable overall. And my nurse was like, you might be transitioning. Do you mind if I check you again? And I was like, sure. And I was 10 centimeters and she was like, I can feel his head. He's right here. So you're actually ready to push.
Yay.
So that was exciting. That was around 8:00 and Brett cried. I think he was just like so excited / like it's such an emotional roller coaster.
He cried when she was like, it's time to start pushing. Oh, yeah. I love that.
Yeah. I think honestly for him, like we've unpacked a lot of the birth story together. And I think for him, he was like, I just wasn't prepared to see you in that amount of pain. It really is a roller coaster. He was like, you know, like we got to the hospital and then you were in a ton of pain when they broke your water and then you were sleeping. And I was so relieved that you were okay. And then you had this rib pain and that lasted for 3 hours and nobody knew what to do. And then it was time to push. And I think it was just a release of like emotion because he was excited and nervous and it's a lot for our partners. And
sure is.
You know,
like
I don't really think about it because I'm the one doing it, but it was sweet to see him kind of tear up and get excited for me.
Oh,
so that was around 8. And honestly, the first hour or so of pushing was extremely chill. Like it was just me and Brett and our nurse, Haley, who we loved. And she was just kind of sitting on the end of the bed and watching the monitor because I really couldn't feel anything. And she would say, okay, you know, you're having a contraction, Brett, this is how you hold her leg. I'm going to hold your other leg. She was really helpful with just like teaching me how to push and guiding me. And I would push 3 or 4 times. And she was like, I can feel his head. It's coming down with every single push. You're doing a great job. But my contractions were still 4 minutes apart. Kind of wild because they had been 4 minutes apart since like 3 a.m. the night before. And this was 8 p.m.
Yeah.
A very long time. They were 4 minutes apart. Even though I was progressing in other ways, the contractions never really sped up.
Yeah.
Is that common?
I was just going to say that I wouldn't say it's common, but that's definitely something that can happen. And I was just going to comment on pushing. It can make pushing a little frustrating because you're like waiting all this time in between these contractions. And you're like, well, I have been pushing for an hour, but I've only had, you know, however, 4 divided by whatever it is. So it can be frustrating because it's like, come on, like I want to push.
Yeah, that was very interesting. And the contractions were somewhat erratic. Like sometimes she would be watching the monitor and she'd be like, okay, you're about to have a contraction. And they would grab my legs and I'd be like ready to push and she'd be watching. And she was like, no,
not really. Yeah.
And so I wouldn't push. So I was like missing contractions. So it'd be like 8 minutes had gone by and then like 5, I don't know. It was very chill. Like we were not panicked.
Yeah.
We're, you know, in between contractions, we were talking about our favorite TV shows and it was nice, but it was also kind of like, what's going on? Like, let's get the road on the show on the road. So she was kind of like checking in with the doctors on staff and the other nurses periodically too. And I actually had a midwife who delivered our baby. So I hadn't seen a midwife before, but I was supposed to have a doctor from our practice. I'm not sure what happened, but it was a full moon and it was the night before July 4th, the holiday. And I think things were just busy and a little crazy, the labor delivery ward. So we had a midwife and I was like, yes, I actually would love to have a midwife deliver me. And her name was Laura, which is my name. So it just felt really special and she was great. So she came in after I'd been pushing for about an hour and kind of watched me push once or twice. And she was like, you're doing great. Just keep working and we'll kind of like monitor what's going on with your contractions. So I pushed like that for an hour and a half. And then she came back and she was like, okay, how do you feel about adding some Pitocin? It could just kind of make your contractions a little closer together. And she also was like, how do you feel about us turning your epidural down a little bit? Because it would probably help you push more effectively. And she said something along the lines of, you know, it's your choice in the end, but honestly, you could be doing this for like 4 or 5 hours. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, we don't want to do that.
Yeah, let's get the Pitocin rolling. So we did that around 9:30 and then things were immediately a lot more intense.
Okay.
So I pushed from 9:30 to 10:30. So 1 more hour and then he was born. Yeah. So it was awesome. The last hour of pushing I could feel a lot more pressure, a lot more of that just like stretching sensation. I could feel kind of like a stinging sensation at one point. And they said that was probably the ring of fire, but my team was amazing. They were just very communicative.
Good.
I had asked in my birth plan for having a warm compress, and they were using olive oil. And my midwife was like working on me the whole time in between pushes. I just felt very cared for, and they were such big cheerleaders, and Brett was so supportive. So even though it was painful and I could feel a lot more, it was a positive experience. So that was great. Yeah. So he was born at like 10:32. So I think it was about 2.5 hours of pushing, and then he was here.
Oh my goodness. Hooray. I know. 2.5 hours, it feels like a long time. And when, especially with first time moms, I say, expect to push for a long time. It can't, 2-3 hours. You're like in your head, you're like, what? That seems like it's forever.
Yeah.
But that is common, first time. I mean, I see sometimes first time moms come in and it's real quick, a couple contractions and 15 minutes of pushing and they have their babies, but nothing that big has gone through that passageway before. So you kind of have to just get it going, get it just right and turn head just right. So. All right. The sound of that heartbeat means it's time for this week's segment of Birth It Up Babies. This one says, hi there. I had my first baby on January 18th and took the natural series to prep. I had the best birth. As you suggested, I was mentally prepared for a day, and then she put in parentheses, as like a days long labor, but baby came 6 days early. I only labored 6 hours and pushed for 30 minutes. Wow. It all happened so quickly. I relied on instincts for comfort measures. It's a good thing I was planning to deliver without an epidural because I was 9 centimeters when I got triage and was ready to push within 30 minutes of arrival. Woo, girl. Yeah, that's quick. I was barely nervous because I felt so prepared for whatever might happen thanks to the thorough info in your course. Definitely helped me stay relaxed leading up to labor. Thanks so much. Oh, I love it. Oh, thank you so much, guys, for sending us these in DMs and emails. I love them. I love reading these out, and I love just going through. I have a camera roll photo album where I just have a ton of them and just going through reading them. It warms my heart. Ugh. And if you want to have an even better birth, just like this mama, head on over to mommylabornurse.com/courses to learn more about our 3 online on-demand birth classes.
That's exactly right. And honestly, I was nervous about that too. Just like thinking about pushing, because, I felt pretty prepared for birth. I felt prepared for contractions. I felt prepared for the epidural procedure. Yeah. My partner felt prepared, but when it came to pushing, I was like, how do you prepare? Like, I can't practice that.
I know.
I was really nervous that I just wasn't going to be able to do it well, or would need like assistance of some sort, or, just of all the things that can happen. And I will say, like, the first hour was so chill. It didn't even feel, really the first hour and a half, it didn't even really feel like I was pushing. I couldn't feel a lot. I was not in pain. Yeah. It was not like everybody was swarming the room. Like, it was very relaxed. The last hour, more intense, but it goes by so fast when you're the one pushing. Like, I actually had to go back in my hospital notes and read like when they administered the Pitocin and when the baby was born, because it felt like 5 minutes. So I was actually shocked to see, it was actually an hour from when the Pitocin was administered to when he was born. So I was pushing for an hour, but it felt like minutes. So.
Yeah. Oh, yay. Yeah. So he came out, I'm sure, and everybody was all happy. And
yes.
Anything eventful happen in postpartum or your hospital stay or anything like that you want to share?
Yeah. So he came right out. He cried for like the first hour. We got to do skin to skin with him. We got to do the delayed cord clamping. Brett got to hold him some, and he was screaming like the whole first hour, but I was able to nurse him about an hour in, and he calmed right down. So I think he was hungry, but he was so cute. He still has the biggest feet I've ever seen. Aww. So in love with him. So yeah. And after that first hour, he was like in that really calm, alert stage, just kind of blinking and staring up at us. And it was a really awesome experience. So after he was born, I delivered the afterbirth about 30 minutes later. And I kind of noticed my nurse and midwife looking kind of concerned. And I was like, what's going on? And apparently I had like a large clot. And so the midwife actually reached up and kind of manually helped that come down. And that was pretty painful, but she was like, I always tell my patients better to do it now than in a week. You're back here in the operating room. And I was like, that's so true.
Yeah.
So they did administer some antibiotics via my IV that same night just to kind of prevent any kind of infection from that. I had a 1st-degree tear, so I did have to get stitched up, but it was not a big deal. It was great to have my baby on my chest for all of that. I felt really content and honestly really happy it was just 1st-degree because, you know, I knew I was probably going to tear, and being a first-time mom, I was pretty scared of it being worse. So I will take the 1st-degree tear.
Yeah. Especially with pushing for 2.5 hours too. Sometimes, you know, I don't know what really the evidence says, like how it's linked, but I often see when moms are pushing for extended periods of time, not that they get more severe tears, but they're just more likely to tear.
Yeah. And I feel like the last couple of pushes, my midwife was really good. I really feel like this is why maybe I didn't tear worse, but she was kind of guiding me like, do a little push, take a break. I really felt that like urge to push in the end. And it also just like the stretching sensation of like his head coming through was so intense that I remember they were like, okay, your contraction's over. You can take a break. And I was like, I don't want to. Like, I want this kid out of me. And I think if it was up to me, I would have just shot him out.
Yeah.
And maybe would have torn worse. So it was kind of helpful to have them just guiding and kind of saying like, okay, you know, just do little baby pushes right now. And that's how I got, I think, his body out in the end. Was I was in between contractions, but I was giving like little baby pushes just because I was like, I had such an urge to push. And she was like, that's great. Just keep doing that. And he came right out. So I did have to get stitches from that tear. And I also had periurethral tears. So, you know, those are tears that go up towards your urethra. And they said those don't require stitching. Mine didn't, but they wanted to make me aware because they said those were going to be pretty uncomfortable and just something to kind of monitor.
Yeah.
So that was the extent of it, but I feel like I walked away from it pretty lucky.
I know. No, that was a great experience. And I'm glad you made a note talking about how great your team was in terms of their communication and how you felt so well taken care of. Because I was just talking about this at the hospital with some of my coworkers, in like how much we can really have an impact on this person's experience. Like I can do all of the prep all day long. Like my mom, you know, take a birth course, learn everything you can. But when it comes to it, if you're not getting great care, it's going to impact your experience. So I'm so glad to hear that you had a really supportive care team. That just makes me so happy.
Yes, no, it was honestly the best experience. We loved our nurse, Haley. She was actually the one.
Shout out to Haley from Richmond. Right?
Yeah. St. Mary's. She was the nurse that was there when I was admitted. And so she was doing like 7 to 7 shifts. So she was there when we first got there and was like, I'll probably see you when I come back tonight. Yeah. Just with being a first time mom, she knew it would probably take me a while. Yeah. And so she got to be there when we arrived, and then she got to be there when he was born. And so that just felt really special. Yeah. So she was great.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. So we stayed at the hospital for about a day and a half and everything was great there. And then we headed home and the postpartum experience started.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Is there a story behind that? We can talk about postpartum.
Yeah, sure. Honestly, there's not a story, but I just kind of want to shine a light on it because I felt so prepared, like I keep saying, for pregnancy and for birth and delivery and even like newborn basics. I have some experience with children, being a nanny and working in childcare. And so I felt like pretty confident, but Postpartum, I didn't feel that prepared for. And, I did physically prepare. Like I made sure I had like free to disposable underwear and that we had Motrin in the house. And I feel like mentally, I just didn't prepare myself because I wasn't exactly sure what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
So I just kind of want to share my experience. It may not be everyone's experience, but maybe just hearing how like one girl dealt with it will make another mom out there feel like, oh, this is a little bit more relatable and make you feel less crazy because you can feel crazy in postpartum.
Sure can. Yeah. Please do share.
Yeah. So I feel like emotionally, it is definitely a roller coaster, and that is totally not me. Like I'm somebody who I really don't cry that often. It takes a lot to work me up. And so I kind of just naively thought like I will be spared from that emotional roller coaster postpartum. And that was not the case. So if you're wondering if there's something wrong with you because you're feeling every single emotion on the spectrum, no, there's nothing wrong with you. There were times when I was like the happiest I've ever felt, like standing in the nursery with him after being in there for all those months and imagining that moment, like you feel so happy. And then there are moments where you feel really angry. Like sometimes when he would wake up crying at night, the first emotion I felt was like rage. And once I was up working with him, it was like, okay, no, this is normal. This is his only way to communicate. Like, you don't need to be angry, but like it's normal to feel, I think, angry sometimes, like angrier than you probably ever have. And then you feel sad sometimes. Like I cried the day we got home from the hospital because I took a shower. And when I got out of the shower, I couldn't pick my clothes up off the floor just because like bending over and squatting down was really painful at that time.
Yeah.
And you just feel overwhelmed sometimes. And then, there's also like postpartum anxiety and depression. Those are definitely a very real thing. And you're sleep deprived. So all those emotions are exacerbated times 100 because you're only getting a couple hours of sleep here and there. So my advice in that area is just like, you might feel crazy and that's totally okay. You might be laughing one moment and then crying, and just know that these feelings, this roller coaster you're on, it's not going to last forever. You're going to get yourself back one day. And it's really important to talk to your family, reach out to other moms, talk to your partner, and obviously monitor if things aren't getting better. It's really important to jump on that and talk to your doctor. But yeah, I mean, I think just having a huge range of emotions the first couple of weeks is to be expected. And my advice to partners is this is not the time to match your wife's energy. Like if she's snapping at you, this is not the time to snap back. Or if she has a really short patience with you, just know like, this is a lot and it's going
not her.
To pass. Yeah.
It's a very extreme version of her and what she's going through right now. Yeah. No, that's very, very good advice.
Yeah. And then physically recovering, it's, I don't want to scare anybody, but it is painful at times. Yeah. It's short-lived and you do forget it. Obviously, I mean, women go on to have multiple children. So
somehow we do.
I feel like you forget. And like, honestly, I'm 12 weeks postpartum right now. And when I was kind of like reflecting back on this, there were things when I was like, oh yeah, that was painful. Like I've already forgotten a lot of the things that were really painful for me. And I think that's a good thing. Like it's your body's way of just kind of like ridding yourself of that. But
closing that chapter back there. Yeah.
We don't need to think about or dwell on that, but know that like there are going to be moments when you are in pain. Like I was sometimes in pain just sitting up to breastfeed or getting the baby out of the bassinet with no core muscles. So if you are in pain, like that's probably to be expected. I also put an unrealistic timeline on myself sometimes. Like I had reached out to some other mom friends who had just had kids. And I was like, when did you feel like 100 or 90% better? And one mom said, by like the end of 2 weeks, I was feeling about 90% better. And then another mom friend said it took about 3 weeks. So I was like, okay, in 2 or 3 weeks, I'm going to feel like 90% better. Everything's going to be fine. And that was not my experience. I healed slowly. So probably like, even at the 6-week appointment, I was like still in a little bit of pain with certain activities. So it probably took me closer to 2 months to feel close to that 90 to 100% mark. Yeah. So I think my advice in this area would be don't put a timeline on yourself. Know that like everybody heals at a different rate. Right. Don't get discouraged if it's been 2 weeks and you're like, I'm still like pulling myself up the stairs by the railing. That's okay. Like it takes some time, especially, I mean, I only had a 1st-degree tear and a vaginal delivery. Like, I can't even imagine the moms that had 2nd and 3rd-degree tears or worse and C-sections. Like, it must take them so much longer to feel better or not. I mean, I think it just differs body to body.
You're exactly right. It just differs so much depending on who you are and what, I mean, everyone who was pregnant and now postpartum, their bodies went through this crazy transformative experience. So like, there's going to be some amount of pain and just, but you're right. You said it best, that everybody kind of heals at a different pace.
Yeah. I mean, you hear this, like, I remember when the doctor was doing a round when I was in the recovery section, and she said, prioritize your health. Or she said something like, take care of yourself. And I was like, sure. But like, really, that is so important. And as a mom, like, it's just really hard to do. Like, I remember it would be like 1:00 in the afternoon, and I would think like, I haven't had any water today. And then all of a sudden it was like 3:00 and I've been like trying to get a glass of water for 2 hours. So like ask for help and prioritize your health would definitely be my advice in this area.
Love it. Love it. Oh,
yeah. So, and then the last little piece of postpartum that I'll share is just to have a lot of grace with yourself, because it is a learning curve, especially like first time moms, but you're doing a lot of learning. You're sleep deprived, you have hormones rushing through your body, you're recovering physically, and you're juggling a newborn. So there's just so much to learn about, like wake windows and schedules and feeding. If you're breastfeeding, like I took a breastfeeding class beforehand, and I do think it was helpful, but breastfeeding is also kind of an on the job learning
curve for sure. Yeah.
Because it depends on your baby's palate, their latch, your supply, your individual nipples. They could be different from left to right. Like there's just a lot of learning that has to happen, like once you have the baby in your arms. So, you know, there's going to be things that pop up that you did as much research and you prepared as much as you could, but you're still going to be learning. So just have a lot of grace with yourself. Baby's learning you too. It might be frustrating at times, but you know, luckily you're spending this time together, hopefully in the first couple of weeks, so that you can learn each other and things do get better. They get easier. So
they sure do. Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on. And you said 12 weeks postpartum, right? So your baby's 12 weeks old.
Yeah.
Oh, what is he doing? Like, what kind of things is he doing right now?
Oh, he's so fun. So sleep-wise, we were sleeping through the night, but the thing with sleep is that it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back. So now we're back to waking up twice in the night. So that's fun. But he's like smiling now. He's really good at tummy time. He loves like being in his bouncy chair. He's starting to like bat at toys. So he's a lot more interactive. Another thing I will say about postpartum is like sometimes, and this may be an unpopular opinion, but like the first 6 weeks are just, they're not that rewarding. Like, yes, you love your baby. It's not about love, but they're not really interacting with you. Like they're not smiling at you. Like you're not getting the warm, fuzzy feelings of the back and forth. Like, oh, you appreciate that I'm feeding you and like sacrificing my nipples for you every 2 hours. Like, no, they're just kind of there and they're screaming.
Little blobs.
Yeah, they're just little blobs. And like I said, it's nothing about love, but like, it's just hard. Yeah. Like you have all these things going on and like, you're taking care of like a blob. So things get better. Around like 6 to 8 weeks, I would say it was like the clouds were lifting. We started seeing some smiles, like things just got a lot more rewarding, and it's only gotten better from there.
Oh, well, that is so sweet. Well, Laura, thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely.
Fabulous. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. You too. Thanks so much for having me.
Wasn't that just such a great story? Oh, I just got off with her and I wish I had kept the recorder on. But one thing she told me off mic was, you know, she was like, thank you for everything you do, blah, blah, blah. But she said that birth stories were really what made such a huge difference in her birth experience, and just listening to other people talk about their births, hearing what they experienced. And she's totally right. I say that in the birth courses that, you know, it's in the resource section. Like, make sure you're listening to a lot of different birth stories, because I can tell you, you know, everything that I know But sometimes you need to hear it from other people and actually hear them speak about their own experience. So yeah, love birth stories, guys. All right, let's see what's on deck next week on the podcast. We are going to be talking about nurse gift baskets. We're going to be going through what to put in a little gift basket or what to get your nurses if you come in and you even want to do that. We have plenty of people who don't, bring anything. And I say this about 40 times during the episode, but don't feel like you ever have to get us anything at all. But I get this question a lot in DMs of what do I bring my nurses? I want to bring them something. So I figured I'd do a whole episode on it. So that's coming out next week. I will see you guys then.
Already feeling a little more confident about pregnancy, birth, and newborn life? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can continue to erase the unknowns and never miss an episode. And if you're looking for even more, Instagram is definitely where I hang out the most. Come join our community of more than 500,000 moms for birth education, tips, and solidarity. You can find me at mommy.labornurse. Check out today's show notes and a searchable library of every Mommy Labor Nurse podcast episode at mommylabornurse.com/podcast. And while you're there, be sure to head to the blog to learn about our online birth classes too. See you next week. And remember, you can have an even better birth no matter how you deliver.